Were Lee Strobel's interviewees in his book The Case for Christ really objective? Well, I fact-checked the first one and found that he certainly wasn't. So stay tuned and I'll tell you why. After I published my first two videos in my attempt to debunk Lee Strobel and his book A Case for Christ, which he claims was based on objective interviews from the leading scholars of the Bible, and which I'm claiming weren't objective at all, I received comments as expected from the Christian fundamentalist. Because as we know, if you present evidence that challenges their belief system, they go into an hysterical breakdown. One guy on Reddit claimed that the basis of my entire argument was I simply just didn't believe Lee Strobel. Well, I gave a little bit of evidence in my overviews on the first two episodes concerning Lee Strobel, and I said I was going to investigate his interviewees and their claims one by one, in which I was going to clearly show that neither Strobel nor his interviewees were objective at all. And here's the first one, Dr. Craig Blomberg. Now, you can't say that Dr. Craig Blomberg isn't a smart guy. He received his doctorate of New Testament from Aberdeen University in Scotland. He later served as a senior research fellow at the Tyndale House at Cambridge University in England. He's been part of international scholar think tanks that have produced a series on the acclaimed works of Jesus. And he's a professor of the New Testament at Denver Seminary. And he's written many books, much content concerning the validity of the Gospels. So this guy is no dummy. But he is an evangelist, and the Denver Seminary is an evangelical college. And as I have shown in prior episodes, an evangelist is a fanatic. And I have shown in past videos that even scientists will ignore their scientific findings if it conflicts with their fanatical beliefs. And in the case of Dr. Blomberg, he is ignoring historical findings in lieu of his evangelical worldview. And one of the biggest arguments that Blomberg has is that we have writings from a bishop named Papias from approximately 125 AD that states he had direct contact with John the Apostle and therefore was able to confirm the validity of the Gospels. Now, when I read Lee Strobel's book, A Case for Christ, the first time, and I can't remember whether it was 1999 or 2000 or 2001, this claim was huge to me because this was direct contact with someone who was actually a witness to Christ. And I figured that if we could find a few more of these direct contacts in the secular or non-secular sphere, that would give me about what I needed to believe to become a reconvert. I wasn't much of an internet user back then, and there was not nearly the abundance of research available on the internet that there is today. But 15 or so years later, when I reread The Case for Christ and actually had a laptop by my side to research these claims, it became very evident that Blomberg was not telling the truth, or at least slanting it to a great degree. Now, first you have to understand the timeline. Many people think that Christ died at year 1 AD, when in actuality it was approximately 30 years AD. Papias was born approximately 60 AD and became a bishop for the church as well as an early Christian writer. He is known for his work, The Exposition of the Sayings of the Lord. However, here's the problem. The vast majority of that work has been lost. We only have a few fragments of it. And one of the fragments that we have is the preface to the book. And in that preface, Papias states a few things which Dr. Blomberg clearly ignores. He states that he relies for information on travelers who come through his region who actually knew the apostles of Christ. And he states that he would rather have this sort of interview than read a text because text can be so unreliable. So this alone is interesting, as one of the early bishops of the church is stating that writings aren't always reliable. But he also states that he never met an apostle. So where did Dr. Blomberg get this information? He's relying on the writings of a later bishop, whose name was Irenaeus, whose works would have been decades after Papias' writings. And Irenaeus' credibility has been questioned by other scholars. And one of the reasons is because of this absolute untruth he spoke about Papias. And Blomberg also uses Papias' writings to confirm that the Gospel of Mark also had validity. And here's what he says in The Case for Christ. Quote, Again, the oldest and probably most significant testimony comes from Papias, who in about 125 AD specifically affirmed that Mark had carefully and accurately recorded Peter's eyewitness observations. In fact, he said, Mark made no mistake and did not include any false statement, and Papias said Matthew had preserved the teachings of Jesus as well. Then, Irenaeus, writing about 180 AD, confirmed the traditional authorship. And here's the problem with this. First, you're dealing with church bishops, whose motivation in life is to propagate Christianity. That is going to make me a little suspicious right there. However, that's not really enough to debunk Dr. Blomberg. What shows that he's not being objective is the fact that he says Papias had direct contact with the apostles when he did not have direct contact with the apostles, specifically John. We have the bishop decades later writing that he had contact with the apostles, specifically John. So there's a contradiction right there that Dr. Blomberg ignores. So we don't know who Papias talked to formulate his belief system that the Gospel of Mark was accurate. He states in the very few fragments we have, the fragments that we know for a fact that he wrote coming from the man himself, that he didn't meet any of the apostles, that he met friends and acquaintances of the apostles. Okay, who were these travelers that he talked to passing through? Now, Papias was a bishop of Hierapolis, which was located in what is today Turkey. So we can't really verify who traveled to see him, who he spoke to, who actually knew the apostles, were friends with the apostles, or the disciples who Christ supposedly appeared to after he was crucified and died, or who the travelers he spoke to were completely fabricating their relationships. And then after Irenaeus, there was a 4th century bishop and Christian apologist named Eusebius who repeatedly transcribed that he didn't think much of Papias' writings. And Eusebius himself was known not to be accurate by most biblical scholars. So we have one bishop, Irenaeus, writing that Papias did know the Apostle John. We got a later bishop saying he didn't, and we have a fragment from Papias' own writings that says he never met him or any of the other apostles directly. So the life of Papias and his works does not confirm or validate the legitimacy of the Gospels at all, like Dr. Craig Blomberg states. And again, this is my problem with evangelists. He is taking the writings of one bishop after the fact, ignoring the writings of a later bishop who contradicts him, and ignoring Papias' writings himself. And as I've said in other videos, Lee Strobel's background is a highly acclaimed legal journalist. I am not a highly acclaimed legal journalist, and I was able to research this. Lee Strobel gave us a response to all us skeptics who are hitting him left and right on the validity of his claims and interviewees. But he can't explain why he didn't do some basic journalistic investigation on the validity of his first interviewee's claims. Now, Dr. Blomberg could say, well, we don't have all the original writings of Papias. As a matter of fact, we don't have anything except those few fragments. So is it possible that Papias later on in his writings said he did meet the Apostle John? John would have been an elderly man by then, but yes, it is possible, but we have no verification of that. We don't know what was lost in Papias' writings because we don't have them. So everything that Dr. Blomberg is claiming in this segment is pure speculation at best. So there, Christian fundamentalist, there is your first bit of evidence that Lee Strobel's interviewees aren't objective. So instead of just nodding along, listening to your pastors, maybe you should start to research your own faith like I do. Now, if you'd like to read some further fiction, check out my novel, The Second Fall, an offbeat apocalypse which I am sure will offend the fundamentalist. On Amazon now, see link in the video description as well as the banner, and I will see you next time when we once again take that sword of reason and reality and thrust it right into the heart of ignorance.